Hello and welcome back to AEF TV in association with Engerati. I'm joined by Crispin Holliday from Aldwych International. Firstly, Crispin, thanks for making the time to be here. We were chatting a little bit off air about what Aldwych do, and you guys go into countries, build power plants, own and operate them for those countries. And I've had a few interviews with ministers from countries saying, well, we are looking for people like you. But one of the issues is around how does that get paid for, and what regulatory environment needs to be in there for you to be comfortable and things like that. So the question I'd like to ask you is just like, where do you see those challenges within Africa? And then we can dive into some of the nuts and bolts of some of those.
Right. Well, clearly being paid is the most important factor for us, and the most critical factor for us in Africa is having cost-reflective tariffs. The countries where those are in place, particularly Kenya, is a very good example, and they've had cost-reflective tariffs for some time. That allows the private sector to be paid automatically without having to resort to subsidies or bailouts or anything like that.
So that makes it more sustainable.
Absolutely. And a lot of countries across Africa have been moving towards cost-reflective tariffs over the last 10 years, but they're not all there yet. That's a critical point.
And what are the major challenges for them to move into that? Is it a social challenge? Is it I'm sure there's not one thing, but what are some of the things that...
It's incredibly political. Yeah. Most countries describe themselves as social democracies, and the cost of power and the cost of water and the cost of food are critical items that there's a perceived resistance to it. I believe actually that this is false. In fact, people prefer to have reliable power. They don't mind if they have to pay a little bit more for it, as long as it's reliable. When people really get angry is when they're paying a lot and the power's unreliable.
Yes, yeah. Or you're paying peanuts and the power is unreliable. That also then sure. Creates a frustration.
Yes.
So how are you seeing that move happen, and actually is there any fast track move, or is it incredibly interlinked with some of the political frameworks and the stability of those, and that is the only thing that will be able to help people move towards this sort of type of financing?
It's moving gradually. It tends to go in fits and starts. I guess the electoral cycle has something to do with that. In the run-up to elections, typically tariffs don't go up. Typically things don't happen to move to cost-reflective tariffs, but post-election you can see regulations being followed through, regulators being empowered to do the tariff increases that are needed.
And when you look at, because up until now I've asked people sort of quite hard questions like, how are you getting that funding? How are you making that work? And a lot of answers have been, we're looking for private funding. Now, private companies don't necessarily or generally like putting in money unless they feel it's safe to do so. And I read a report recently about the perception, the big demarcation of perception of companies who are already in Africa and investing and know how it works,
with it,
to companies who haven't done it before, and the perception of risk is hugely different. What needs to be done to change that perception of risk?
I think it's a question of people understanding the market and being knowledgeable about it, and that takes time. I think people can try and talk about how stable or well regulated a sector is, but people actually need to experience it over time to actually believe it and be comfortable with it, in my experience.
So is the only thing that could happen, and if you were to say to someone else that, look, Africa is ready, and I've heard this term, Africa ready for business, a lot, and as you say, it's easy to say it, you've got to demonstrate it a little bit as well. But what's the one key thing that you've seen change where you think actually there has been a tipping point, or do you think it's just evolutionary and you can't pick at one thing?
The one thing that makes a real difference when we're negotiating and developing projects is whether the government counterparty team is experienced and particularly well advised. If the government counterparty team has good advisors in place, that makes all the difference. But governments need to accept that they need external advice. This is not easy. Project finance is a complex thing, and you need expert advisors, and you need to pay for them. They're very expensive. So the countries that have understood that and found some funding or put funding in place for expert advisors, that makes a huge difference.
No, and that corroborates some of the other interviews and the key things they've said. So I've been put under pressure, and unfortunately that's all we've got time for. I'd love to ask you more questions, and if we can find another slot, because I have a few more about regulatory frameworks and things like that, but maybe we can talk off air a little bit. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for making the time to be here, and thank you for watching. Remember, this is all available on AEF TV and engerati.com.